All right, let's dive right into this explainer of Richard Rumelt's definitive framework, a framework that literally shatters the illusion of what we think strategy actually is. For decades now, organizations have been confusing ambition with action and vision boards with actual concrete planning. Rumelt, who's often called the guru of strategy, argues something pretty wild. Having a real strategy is so incredibly rare today that merely possessing one gives you a massive competitive advantage. So today we're going to unpack exactly what makes a strategy work and why so many smart leaders get it completely wrong.
To really understand strategy in its purest form, picture this. It's October 21, 1805. Admiral Lord Nelson is facing off against a combined French and Spanish fleet off the coast of Spain. He is completely outnumbered in a literal life-or-death scenario. This is the ultimate high-stakes challenge, right? It's exactly the kind of do-or-die moment where true strategic thinking is forged.
So, the enemy has 33 ships to his 27. Now, conventional naval tactics of the era dictate that the British should just form a line parallel to the enemy and engage in a traditional broadside exchange. But look, that's a battle of attrition, and in a battle of attrition, his numbers would absolutely lead to defeat. If Nelson just acted on a vague goal of winning and followed standard operating procedure, he would have lost. Period.
But Nelson, he doesn't do that. He splits his fleet. He forms two columns and strikes perpendicularly right into the enemy line, basically cutting their formation in half. Why? Because he diagnosed that the less trained enemy gunners would struggle in the heavy sea swell, so he isolated their ships and focused his superior firepower. He achieves this catastrophic victory, losing 0 ships to their 22. 0. That sets the ultimate baseline for our analysis today. He didn't just want to win. He designed a way to win.
Okay, so here is our agenda for this explainer. We're going to cover the anatomy of a strategic victory, the hallmarks of bad strategy, the kernel of good strategy, sources of strategic power, and finally, how to actually think like a strategist. Let's get into it.
Section 1. Anatomy of a strategic victory. This is really about the essence of effective action. Good strategy is actually quite unexpected, mostly because so few organizations actually do it. They rely on templates and, frankly, positive thinking. But real strategy? It's about finding the hidden power in a situation. As Rumelt states, Nelson didn't just set a vague goal to win. He analyzed the sea conditions, he analyzed enemy weaknesses, and he focused his resources where they would have a totally devastating impact. He applied power to a specific critical point. It wasn't about having more ships, it was about leveraging the ships he had to create an overwhelming local advantage. And that right there is the essence of effective action.
Moving on to Section 2, the hallmarks of bad strategy, or recognizing the illusion of planning.
So bad strategy isn't just the absence of good strategy. It's a distinct phenomenon all on its own. It's the active avoidance of the hard, uncomfortable work of making choices. Rumelt defines fluff with this incredibly sharp observation, describing impressive-sounding terminology that actually lacks any real substance at all. We've all seen this, right? Think of those massive corporate presentations filled with buzzwords like synergy and paradigm shift that, at the end of the day, just restate the obvious without telling a single person what to actually do. Leaders often fall into 4 specific traps, usually because they just don't want to make hard choices. Beyond fluff, we have the failure to face the challenge, like International Harvester ignoring terrible labor relations just to project growth. Then, there's mistaking goals for strategy. And finally, setting bad strategic objectives that are entirely disconnected from the actual obstacles staring them in the face. This absolutely nails the central confusion in modern business, mistaking what you want to achieve for how you are actually going to achieve it. Setting a target of, say, 20% revenue growth is just an ambition. Honestly, it's a wish. A defined plan that allocates resources and outlines specific steps to overcome market obstacles to actually get that growth, now that is a strategy.
All right, Section 3, the kernel of good strategy. Let's look at the 3 elements of success. So, if goals and fluff are out, how do we build an approach that actually works in the real world? How do we strip away the corporate gibberish and get down to the core engine of success? Well, Rumelt calls this engine the kernel. It's a highly practical framework that forces an organization to define the true obstacle, establish a clear policy, and execute coordinated tactics. First up, you must diagnose what is really going on. Simplify all that overwhelming complexity into one critical challenge. Second, you set a guiding policy that rules out a vast array of actions so you can focus your approach. And third, you take coherent action. The actions have to fit together and reinforce each other. If your marketing team says one thing and your supply chain does another, you completely lack coherence.
Which brings us to Section 4, Sources of Strategic Power and Creating and Sustaining Competitive Advantage.
Once you have the kernel in place, your diagnosis, your guiding policy, and your coherent action, you need to fuel it. And that brings us to the sources of potential strategic advantage. Good strategy creates a lasting edge by tapping into specific, systemic sources of power. Strategy is basically a design problem, and harnessing leverage, like David using a sling from a distance against Goliath, allows you to neutralize a much larger competitor. You don't just match strength with strength. You identify the one or two critical factors that will make the biggest difference, and you apply concentrated force right there.
Consider how Steve Jobs used the power of focus to shrink Apple down to a viable core, literally saving them from bankruptcy by choosing what not to do. In 1997, Apple was trying to do everything for everyone. Jobs comes in and cuts 15 desktop models down to 1. He eliminated peripherals. I mean, this is basic business logic, but it's incredibly unexpected because most organizations simply do not have the discipline to focus their resources on such a narrow front.
Another massive source of power is building a chain-link system. This was beautifully demonstrated by Sam Walton. His integrated network of Walmart stores and logistics hubs created an advantage that competitors simply couldn't copy. By linking 150 regional outlets to a central distribution hub, the whole system had to be strengthened together. When competitors like Kmart tried to compete with their decentralized models, they failed. Why? Because you can't just copy one link. You have to copy the entire reinforcing chain, and that is incredibly hard to do.
Finally, Section 5. Thinking like a strategist. The psychology behind organizational behavior.
To apply all of this theory, we really have to examine the human element and the cognitive styles driving these decisions. Why do so many smart people make bad strategies? Well, it often comes down to their psychological profile and how they handle the discomfort of making choices. Take a look at these archetypes and ask yourself, are the leaders in your organization acting as clear-thinking strategists, or are they goal setters and fluffers avoiding the hard choices? The goal setter lives in the state of magical thinking, believing that just stating a goal makes it happen. The fluffer hides behind complex language to mask their lack of depth. But the strategist? They possess intellectual humility. They test their assumptions against reality, and they actually have the courage to say no to good ideas in order to pursue the great ones.
Ultimately, building the true mindset of a strategist requires recognizing that a strategy isn't a permanent, dusty document. It's a living experiment that requires critical thinking and constant adjustment. You literally have to treat your new strategy as an educated prediction of how the world works. Science is a method, right? Not an outcome? You must keep your head under immense pressure, accept that uncertainty is just part of the game, and constantly adjust your coherent actions based on the actual feedback reality gives you.
I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to challenge the way you view every mission statement and growth target you encounter from here on out. Are you actually diagnosing your challenges, picking a guiding policy, and designing coherent actions? Or are you just writing down your dreams and calling them a strategy? Remember, bad strategy is the active avoidance of hard work. But good strategy? That is the ultimate competitive advantage. Keep thinking clearly, make the hard choices, and thank you for diving into this explainer with me.